Shinji and Warhammer40k, OVA 2. Evangelion Fantasy Battle, full leaked script. What you are about to hear is the full leaked plotline of the summer hit of the century, Evangelion Fantasy Battle. Please do not share anywhere else, as I've only just set up this account, and quite frankly I don't want to get sued into the ground by Nerve or anyone else. Thanks. There was a man, a magic man, and his knowing was wide and powerful. Not even he could stop death, however. And as he held the cooling palm of his wife, he decided then that if he couldn't have her, then even the memory of her would be destroyed. She would remain perfect in his memory and his alone. No one else could own their love. Let there be no one and nothing to remind him of her, for of her too will die the last of his human desires. There was a boy, a crying boy, and he was sent away as a child to live far away from the capital. In those dark woods and simple farming lands he knew nothing but how to live from one day to the next. In time even the memory of his mother began to fade, and the city he was born to nothing more than a misty scene. There was a girl, a sad girl, living alone in the forest deep. She was sent away as her elder sister died, the last of her family. The rest of the village thought her an omen of misfortune, and would have killed her had they not thought her ghosts would only curse their village further. She watched the village burn in the distance, and closed her eyes as she felt the approach of something large, green, toothy, and vicious. There were gods, ancient asleep, and in their silent state they counted the passing of years and took note of the stars. Even in their chosen death, clad within their metal shells, still burned the cleansing fire. 15 years later, the magician stood there in his hooded robes. Nobody had seen his face for years and years. Only his bearded chin was in view, and no one had any idea of just how it was he could walk around without tripping all over things. No one dared to ask, though. His powers, though often unused, only became more and more terrible with the passing of years. Therefore, when he went before the king to say that something comes, something beyond even his powers to defeat or predict, then everyone feared for the safety of the kingdom itself. After almost 9,000 years, the stars were right, the heavens would open again and the gods would feed. There would be no salvation in prayer, for it was a test of humanity's right to exist. It had happened before, and will happen again, for that was why the imperial capital was called the Third City. It was built upon the ruins of earlier failures. A shaman lay dying, and even as his spirit left, he pointed to the stars. Humans are going to die, and so then they would take over the empty land. It's the time to meet the star gods and wake up their own land god. It's the time. There's killings to be done. The scary small lady was there by the one she loved as her own father, though they weren't related by blood or even species. The scary small lady was ready to lead her chosen people to their destiny. There was a letter. It called him to the capital. It couldn't be refused, for there were 2 armoured knights accompanying it. And so the unwanted son said farewell forever to those peaceful days, amid whispers of demon child and heresy. The Third City was huge beyond belief, but its gleaming white facade hid something greater still. Underneath were ruins, an underground expanse, a city within a city. In it worked the magics that kept the empire strong, and the faith of the people lit up the false skies. There, one of the knights took off its helmet to reveal she was a woman all along. She was the guardian, a respected veteran, and she brought him to the Golden Priestess to receive the blessings of the city within. And further down the sacred ancient tunnels, they brought him to it. The sleeping machine god, and his father. A girl with blue hair, with 3 large cloaked figures around her, stood and watched as the enemy made its presence known. It dove from the sky and rose from its pit as a being large and grotesque. It was death black and bone white, and it brought only pitiless destruction. All the weapons of war, all the magics of the land, nothing fazed it. The Third City was ready to fall like the others before it. She smiled slightly, the only joy she allowed herself to show. Fight for us or die with us. The prophecies were incredibly specific, despite being thousands of years old. The machine god was waking. Once before it had scourged the world nearly clean of life in its war against the star gods. It could do so again. In its long sleep, however, its mind had deteriorated, so much so that it couldn't even move on its own. It needed a new mind, a fresh new soul, one that was young and without regrets. One born from a cold room, one whose blood sang with old power yet could not use it. One among all the children in all the world. Him. He refused. He had never been wanted. Now he was just to throw his life away at their will. He had no power. He couldn't do it. Such a beast. He had no power. They begged. They threatened, but unless he made the choice, nothing could be done. Unwilling, the machine god would just reject the sacrifice. His father gestured, and up on the air appeared the carnage in all full sight, sound, and even smell. Everyone screaming, everyone burning, everyone dying. He wanted to vomit. However, it all only further drove into his mind how unsuitable he was to carry their hope. Then he saw one blue-haired girl walking down the street, calmly as if invincible in the midst of that chaos. She turned, and it seemed that despite the distance, she was looking right at him. And she smiled, slightly. The Star Angel spasmed and shot out more yellow cross-shaped beams. Ancient buildings around her started to crumble, and a stone wall fell on her. She didn't have time to flee, and was crushed instantly. He found himself crying. He found himself saying yes. He will give himself to the Evangelion. They made the proper preparations and followed the half-forgotten rituals. He had feared it would eat him, but instead it seemed as if he had to crawl into its spine. There was a seat there made of strange, softly shining white metal. Nobody knew if the great beast had an intelligence that was mastered, or had developed and lost that on its own. Its sight was his sight. Its heart was his heart. For the first time in many, many centuries, the Evangelion walked in the light of day. He screamed. It was terrifying enough to see the destruction the third angel was carving out of the city, but the Evangelion's eyes could actually see the souls being sucked up by one of its two bone-like masked faces. The Evangelion could hear their anguish, taste their flavour. The angel noticed its ancient enemy and attacked. He struggled. He begged the machine spirit. He screamed, "Move! Please move! Move, damn you! Must I get out and push?" The Evangelion roared. Below, a large slab of stone and mortar was pushed off a pile of rubble. From under it, the blue-haired girl heaved at the slab and sent its great weight tumbling with ease. She looked up, expectant. "Show me the power of humanity." Its fury was primal and pure, its power tested and true. This was the eternal principle of man. To struggle on, to fight on, even until the very end. To live, the instinct for survival, kill or be killed. And that he who has nothing left to lose might gain everything. The reluctant boy awoke, knowing nothing. He couldn't understand everyone's thanks. He bowed to the command that no one must know someone lay within the machine god. Not only did it invite trouble from their enemies, he also felt he didn't deserve any praise. 20 days later, and the Undercity lost its luster. There was nothing for him but prayer, cleansing, and training. He made a few friends of his age, though. There was the young tech priest, who knew much about the Evangelion, but had no talent for combat. There was the young guardsman, fit and impatient for his time to arrive. There was the daughter of the Inquisitor, stern but kind. The boys were bored and asked him to come with them up to see the third city. To escape her inquisition was tough, but they managed. Up there, despite the devastation, it was still wondrous. The boys roamed about and enjoyed the many sights and sounds and tastes and smells. In all the frantic bustle, though, the unwanted son found himself separated from his friends. He wandered around until he found himself at the coarser parts of the city, where the damage was most severe. He saw how people were suffering and hated himself for his lack of strength. He was accosted by a group of thugs who saw how clean and well dressed he was. He ran off amid the taunts and jeers of the people. He bumped into someone. The three cloaked figures looked ready to attack, but a mere flick of her hand held them back. The blue-haired girl looked at the reluctant boy, stammering out his apologies, and said it was no problem. She was new to the city and could use a guide. At his further regret at being new to the city himself, then perhaps they could learn of it together. As they walked around, he looked on with wonder at his strange new companion. She was a very odd girl, alternately acting like she knew everything, then being so confused by simple things even he took for granted. She laughed at none of the jokes, disliked the sweetness of cakes and candies, and frowned at all the womanly fineries. Yet when she turned and smiled just slightly at him, he felt like he'd been given something precious. They stopped to eat inside an inn. As they sat there, someone at the next table, a man with rusty metal armour, began to relate tales of his deeds. He told of the many campaigns for which he sold his sword, but his greatest was the drive to the east, purging the borders of the orcish filth. They were barely more than animals, and he slew them like animals. They were savage and brutish, as willing to eat each other as they would devour fat breasts and fresh young livers. They were an abomination to the natural order of things, and it was the duty of every man to wipe them out. The blue-haired girl, herself having put up her hood, became so very unnaturally calm. She drank pale honey and said nothing, waiting for the food. Those over at the next table roared more, being drunk out of their minds. They spoke of the green-skinned stupidity in battle, their lack of any form of honour, and how their only method of winning was to drown the enemy in green blood. One of them took out a necklace of large pointed teeth. One of the blue-haired girl's guards suddenly roared and leapt at them. Under his thick cloak he was clad all over in furs and black cloth, and his arms were powerful. A single sweep sent all their tumbling. Everyone soon was in an enthusiastic melee. The blue-haired girl just sighed. She sat there with him, utterly calm. Only they were posts of order in all that chaos. Until someone slashed with a dagger, and out from one of her guards green blood spilled out. Everyone then began panicking. Orcs! Orcs in the city! Weapons were drawn. The three guards brought out from under their cloaks spiked knuckles. No quarter would be given. Still the two children just sat there. A throwing knife flashed, and the unwanted son could only look on in amazement as it was stopped mere inches from his head. The girl had caught it, uncaring that the edge cut into her palm. She squeezed her hand further, red blood dripped, and the metal crumpled under her grip. She looked up and her red eyes held deadly fury. She was indeed quite scary. She bowed to him as if excusing herself, then launched herself into the fray. People began flying all over the place, being thrown into walls and breaking tables. She then leapt at one of her orcish guards and pounded him with a single punch into the floor for a stupid lack of control. Whistles from outside announced the arrival of the Imperial Guard. The scary small lady and her orcs prepared to fight through. The unwanted son winced. He got up and asked for them to run. He'd take care of it. Please, he begged them, trust him. She nodded, had one of her orcs charge right through a back wall, and then left him alone amidst all that mess. The Imperial Guard found him standing in front of the hole, holding up a fist-sized identity plaque. It was marked with the Imperial seal, half a leaf in ruby. Under that were the runes of his name, and an inquisitorial sigil. Beside that was a ministerial seal. And beside even that was the winged skull crest of the Imperial High Guard. Worse still was the symbols proclaiming him the son of the court magician. They had no choice but to just leave back through the door and continue their pursuit from another route. The orcs and their young leader were already far away. Needless to say, his actions displeased many greatly. Treason! Even from him it was unforgivable. Ever have the orcs been the bane of mankind, always lurking at the fringes of their empire, hungering to bring it all down. Not even ignorance can excuse it. They were not human. Surely he should have seen so easily where his loyalty lay. His father even broke into his mind to see what he'd seen. Even the blue-haired girl. It was a bad omen. No human had hair and eyes like that, at least none that had been allowed to live. Clearly, those superstitions had cast some basis in truth. They were indeed the heralds of misfortune. He couldn't believe it. They put him in jail to think over his actions. For days he sat there in darkness and silence. He never really had much contact with others of his age. Back in his village, he was picked on for being so scrawny and so cowardly. The girls didn't want anything to do with him. Verily, she was the very first other child to look upon him and not judge with her eyes, to accept him as what he was and ask for nothing more. He didn't regret being so selfless, for once. An unknown span of days later, the cell doors opened. It was a young woman who smiled sadly at him. She was the Silver Priestess, one of the 3 attendants to the Golden Priestess, Silver Priestess, Bronze Cleric, and Iron Cleric. She told him she didn't think he didn't really do anything wrong, for no one was killed. Everyone had the right to decide for themselves that life should not be wasted, no matter what form it took. However, she asked for him to accompany her up to the battlements. It was a green tide, a sea of orcs. From horizon to horizon, nothing but green. A horde beyond all hordes. The orcs had encamped completely surrounding the third city. They kept a distance of at least half a mile away, but it was a siege nonetheless. Standing high above them was an Ava of their own. It was hunched over, painted a garish orange with checkered bands of white and black. Upon its shoulders it carried what looked like a small fortress. It also had the equivalents of anklets and pouches as archer roosts, cannon mounts, and various other shooty things. As if sensing his arrival, the orcs began to roar and stamp their feet on the ground. So many were there that they actually produced a small tremor he could feel. Their roars and stomps were at a crude but energetic rhythm. The Principio Eternus rose out from the Undercity on a floating pedestal behind him. His father, the old king, his new friends, all were already there. All looked grim. It was bad enough having to face the angels and their star gods, but a force of that magnitude. The Imperial Guard were the finest in the land, but against the wave upon wave threatening to splash over them, it would be bloody beyond measure. He was ordered into the Evangelion. He could feel their blame. The heavens broke apart, and there arrived the next of the angels. It floated down to the ground between the armies and turned its armoured head to all the green around it. For the first time an angel spoke, and expressed surprise that the infestation was still around. "You tried that kills us and we're still here," was overall their common response. "Orcs are made for fighting. Fighting yous." They all began thumping their axe heads on the ground and chanted out a roar tune. As prophesied, the second angel was a carrier. Small pods rained out from it to become squid-like floating soldiers. In moments a river stream split, half towards the third city and half towards the orcs. Gargant Moonbiter roared. The orcs charged. Rah! At that distance, it looked simply like 2 splashes of colour blurring along a line. It would be a matter of which side ran out to bodies first. The angel rose to the air again and floated over to the city. The walls were enchanted, but nothing that kept small angel spawns from climbing on it with their clawed appendages. The Imperial Guard fought bitterly to hold the line, even as the angel dropped more and more of itself. The orange Ava tackled it to the ground. The angel closed off its holes and unfurled glowing feelers. Gargant Moonbiter had sickle-like blades strapped to its forearms. And as thus, 2 ancient enemies battled. He almost leapt to help, but his father refused to let him leave. Let the enemies of man fight it out. The unwanted son could only bite his lip. The battle was brutal beyond belief. Such was what happened when 2 creatures utterly without care for their own lives met in opposition. However, slowly the orcs were being pushed back. Angel spawn was spilling over the walls. The orcish Ava was pushed to the ground, one of its blades splintering. He screamed out his dismay. The angels were the enemy of all who hoped to live, orc and human. He so wished he could help. He wanted to give his regret to those who fought. And suddenly a small window opened up in his vision. "Why do you disturb me?" asked the girl with blue hair. She grimaced, holding back a scream of pain as her Evangelion's armour was pierced through. Gargant's Moonbiter roared again, pulled out the attack appendage and yanked the angel closer. It swung with its remaining arm blade, only for the angel to again counter with its armoured head. She kicked up, knocking it over and exposing its core. The angel shot out with both feelers, wrapped around the Evangelion's left arm, and drawing taut, sliced it right off. This time she screamed. He found himself in a single bound, clearing the wall and landing with both feet on the angel's back, stomping it down. Principio Eternus roared. It too wanted blood and battle. It hefted its trident and stabbed down. The angel bucked it off, bleeding. Hurrah! The white river fell apart under the green tide. The orcs surged forth towards the angel. Uncaring of their own lives, they began to climb on it, bite of it, stab at it. The angel writhed and slapped at itself with its feelers. The purple Ava grabbed at those and held the angel still. The orange Ava then took up the fallen trident and stabbed at the core. As it cracked, the angel began to melt. Both Avas roared out in victory. The scary small lady visited the city alone and in confidence. If anything at all were to happen, her great horde would pile high the wall with corpses just to get in and raze it all to the ground. There would be no fourth city. She wasn't protected by any prophecy. She'd sought out that Ava herself and drank of its power. Why? Asked the reluctant boy. Why did she risk her life for him? Because as she represented the orcs, so must he represent humanity, and she had found him worthy of living. As long as he lived, and as long as the heavens remained open, then the orcs may ally with humanity. No one liked it, but the orcish encampment outside did vastly help the city's defence. Beyond it, humanity was at the mercy of the angels. More and more people fled to the protection of its walls. Tensions boiled high, but the threat of mutual annihilation kept it all from spilling over. For once they needed each other. Amid that, the unwanted son and the scary small lady shared the stories of their lives and what they wished for the future. They became each other's first true friends. The third angel floated in a blue shell and hovered contemptuously out of their reach. All magics and mass cannon attacks didn't even mar its polished surface. Both Avas launched massive enchanted javelins, which did actually leave a mark. The angel blasted them with an energy beam. It spoke, saying that it was all unnecessary. The star gods only demanded tribute. Give unto them the poor, the infirm, the unwanted, and the star gods shall grant unto them all gifts. Pitiful creatures, did they not realize all their arts and powers were derived from the stars? Even the machine gods were forged from the seeds of that which made angels. The orcs were loathsome to the star gods. Reject them, and the glory of man shall shine again like in the first city. Worship the star gods, and it shall all be theirs again. There were already several orcs in the city, and they bared their great teeth at the throng around them. Outside, the horde prepared. Inside her Ava, the blue-haired girl remained very, very still. The reluctant boy pleaded with his father. In the end, the magician spoke out. The wards did nothing against the angels. It only seemed to fuel them further. So, the source of the wards must be broken, and its power absorbed by the Evangelions. In the meantime, he put his hands to the marble floor of the throne room, and out from his palms glowing etching marked into the surface. All around the city, lines and intricate designs flared into being. The angel was repelled from overhead city, as a magical field suffused the air. The angel blasted away to no effect. Within, the old magician was brought to his knees. He sweated, but held firm. Even his power couldn't save his wife, but for the moment, it should serve well enough. The two Evangelions descended into the Undercity, or what had been the second city. Below that was the first city. Below even that, a forgotten power. It was massive, a black monster chained down in a spherical underground cavern. It seemed asleep, then suddenly snapped with its toothy jaws as the two comparatively tiny Avas approached. They were to it as men would be to them. A two-pronged spear was stabbed into its core, right in the centre of its massive forehead. The bound star god then spoke into their minds. Free it, and its power shall be theirs. By its word carved into eternity, it will not harm them or that which they valued. Its enemy was the star gods, with whose lies their ancestors had bound it underneath. Let it free, for it could be content with feeding off emotions. It was the Night Lord, and its chaos was the spark of life itself. It would make souls, not break them. Take off the nullifying chains, and its blessings would be beyond their imagination. Whole worlds would open up to them. Eternity would bow to them. With it all things are possible. And a blue-haired girl replied, if the ancestors were willing to give up their souls and deal with those who are loathsome to them, then you are more detestable still. If the star god may only appear and the stars are right, you must be an enemy for all time. You are all fools, said the Night Lord, as the Avas pushed the lance in. You do not know what powers you trifle with, it said as it died. The Avas exploded out of the ground, upon wings of darkly shimmering energy. Ancient wards flared purple, then faded. The angel shot at the palace, and the magic man merely smiled a little, as brightness filled his vision. The Avas roared and flew up at the angel. They held the lance by its prongs, and the coiled bands of metal slid apart to give each a pointed spear. The Avas then shot forth, their weapons held ahead and pierced right through the angel. It exploded over the city, bathing everyone in brightness. And something laughed. Wisps, like softly glowing smoke, began to rise from the city. It all gathered towards a single spot, all coming together into a point of light. That light grew larger and larger and ever so much brighter until finally, the gates of heaven completely broke open. It hovered over the city, vast and unimaginably powerful. It was vaguely draconic in shape, with 6 massive wings, or tendrils. It had no shadow, for it was the Burning Lord. A star god had arrived. All those souls, trapped by the Night Lord, now fed the star god. It laughed some more. Fools. Fools. Humans thought themselves so clever, using the star gods to imprison the chaos gods, then use its powers to seal away the star gods. Fools! Now nothing could help them any further. They had no power of their own, always stealing it from others. Always crawling, always searching. Their hopes, their despair. They were food, and it was time they accepted their fate. They were made by the universe to be eaten by those greater. No matter how much they tried to delude themselves, nothing mattered. You little creatures, submit, obey, be devoured. Death is your gift, death is your truth. In the falsehood of existence, they could have all they wished. Cattle led comfortable lives until needed. The Evangelions flew up and attacked, and the powers they gained from the Night Lord were incredible indeed. The sky was painted in violent colours, writ in fire and pain to the music of rage. The Burning Lord remained unscathed. It turned its single eye to the Orange Ava, and Gargant Moonbiter writhed in pain. This is made of my flesh, said the star god, and this flesh I take back. The Orange Ava was swallowed by a glowing white globe, and was brought up to the Burning Lord. The scary small lady had never known fear, always being told she was better off dead by the people she grew up with. Only her sister cared, but even she suffered so much for her sake. When the orcs overran her village, the shaman saw in her red eyes the same utter lack of fear, utter lack of hesitation to die that characterised the orcs themselves. They too had such red eyes. Blue hair was for men a sign of ill omen. To the orcs, blue was a lucky colour. She was accepted for the first time, appreciated for the first time. She was cared for and respected. She did have an unnatural strength, long hidden as just yet another thing to separate her from other humans. To the orcs, being kicked around by a being barely taller than their knees was endlessly amusing. They were her people. She loved them, and they loved her back, or as far as they could actually feel that odd emotion. The orcs were an old race, a powerful one, for they had once been able to defeat a machine god sent by man. They had buried it, and no one could wake it, even as over the countless years it had healed its wounds. Gargant Moonbiter was waiting for only her. Only the war boss was allowed into that cave, and only a pure child could ever have coaxed its decayed mind. There was no prophecy. There was only the perfect orky coincidence. She who had never known fear, she who could endure beyond human limits for the first time, screamed in terror. The Evangelion was slowly sinking into the strange flesh of the star god, and it ate away at her everything. "What a curious soul," the Burning Lord commented. Human and yet not human. It had changed itself by its own will. A small offering, but satisfying nonetheless. The orcs began loading themselves into their own catapults, and then launched wielding big chopping axes as the star god. They exploded into bursts of green blood as they crossed a certain invisible boundary. No end to it, until they were all dead. Humanity cowered inside their useless walls. He was crying. He said her name over and over again. The Evangelion turned its head around. The city was in shambles, as angel spawn poured through a massive crack in the legendary walls. The green tide was slowing to a trickle. The palace was a pillar of smoke in the distance. Father. His friends. Humanity. Nothing could be done. It was their final day. What was man against such power? What was he to eternity? Since earliest time were they all just destined to die? He could see no way to change that. The future was closed to him. He had no strength. He wasn't so smart. No human power, no human trickery could prevail. Screaming and begging filled his ears. From under and on the ground, more and more souls floated up to feed the star god. He could feel their despair. He could hear their last final plea. He screamed out, shaking his head, his tears flicking out. He took big gulps of breath. So much suffering! All their lives were for nothing? He couldn't accept that. Principio Eternus stood up straight and opened its right hand out. 2 streaks sped into its palm, twining into the familiar bident. Its eyes flashed. It looked up and roared. "It is futile," rumbled out the Burning Lord. Its flesh was unpleasable, its soul was small and insignificant. What did it want? For the star god to die? Impossible. And the unwanted son believed. He wasn't strong enough in the hand, he wasn't strong enough in the mind, but he was strong in his heart, and that was all that he could give. When all was dark and hope was gone, it was when the light of the soul should shine at brightest. The Evangelion rose into the sky. It roared again. There was as if a cyclone around itself. The soul wisps were sucked away from the Burning Lord and to around itself. 6 blue glowing wings unfolded up and out from its back. The very sky seemed to shriek. Its defiant roar reached up the heavens. "Awaken, Titan, you who slay the enemies of man, you who stand at the gates of hell, you who shall break into the heavens. Rise up, young man, and become legend." And this is how the fantasy ends. Those who take the light in their own might are merely pretenders to power. The true warrior of fate needs no adoration or fear, no tricks or overwhelming effort. He need not be stronger or smarter or innately more capable than everyone else. He need not even admit it to himself. He need not win victory after victory to be considered a badass. All he needs to do is stand there, at that moment when all hope is dead, and look upon the abyss without flinching. That the armies of heaven and hell would see that this is a soul that cannot be conquered, and thus conquers all. He stands alone, but is never alone. His power is no one's, and yet everyone's. The warrior of fate writes his own destiny. Because he gives his everything, no one can trap him, no one can own him, and no one can ever take away what he'd earned. "I see," realized the Burning Lord. "You are a star god as well. I greet you, bright lord. Welcome. Let us feast." "I am no god," he replied. "I am the hope and the fury of man. You have fed on us, and your power comes from us. This is the vessel of my will. Know its name. Evangelion, Titanicus, Principio Eternus. And know you too must be judged. Your death has sought you out." The star god was still actually larger than the city itself. Shining from within, energies began to crack the Ava's armour, until finally it had exploded. All the souls merged with that glowing sphere, expanding out into something that stood like a man and glowed with the power of all their souls. The burning lord opened its maw to reveal teeth sharp beyond all imagination. The bright lord opened its mouth to reveal the unwanted sun standing there, outside on the left shoulder of the Evangelion. Principio Eternus still held the nemesis Spidant. The two titanic forces shot up into the sky, curving around to a distance. The star god spat out beams of energy. The unwanted sun slapped those aside. He punched out, and the glowing arms sharpened into points that extended far across the land. The attack simply scraped across the star god's back. They circled, roared out, and charged at each other. They slammed into the other and literally broke the sky. The shockwave was visible and expanded out across half the world. The ground below them melted into red-hot rivers as their battling powers pushed down. The Burning Lord snapped and swallowed the new human god. Cut in half, it still screamed out in fury. It shoved out with its arms into the star god's body. The glowing extendables pierced out into a strange hollow space deep inside the star god and was stopped by a glowing hexagonal red field. It opened its palm and the Ava pierced the field to fly across the expanse. Great glowing spikes grew from the walls to impale it. It threw the lance towards a strange red core. The sun stood at the tip of it. As if he was piloting it, he weaved through a maze of sudden spikes and barriers. A glowing wall appearing in front of him was just broken through. He covered his face from the fragments. He neared the core. He yelled out her name. A bright blue beam broke out of the Burning Lord's back. The star god screamed in pain. Strange orange smoke wafted from the hole, its energetic lifeblood. Explosions rippled across its form. Something tumbled out of the sky. There the unwanted sun stood, wounded and bleeding himself, his clothes burned and still burning in places. He rolled the very tip of the broken bident. He was grinning, though he was already falling to his death. In his arms he carried a somewhat confused blue-haired girl. The Burning Lord shattered, sending them hurtling out of control down into the ground. A battered, smouldering purple Evangelion slammed into the ground. A heavily scarred orange Evangelion landed on top of it with a loud clang and bounced off to crash again nearby. A strong wind passed through the battlefield. Out from the smoke walked two figures. The unwanted sun limped, supported by the scary small lady, who didn't look quite so scary then. She seemed just amused. "You sure you're not a little orc inside?" she asked him. "'Cause that was just so insane. And stupid. It was stupidly insane. And yet somehow, awesomely, it worked. It was all so incredibly orky." "I think I'm a lot bruised inside," was his answer. "Heal thyself. Thou art God." He shook his head. No. He embodied the hope of man, and only man can ever truly command the destiny of man. His truest power was the ability to live as one, and in the end die as one. "I'm not human," she added reluctantly. "You're human enough for me." She grinned slightly, half of his face still throbbing and numb. She blushed. Humans and orcs cheered upon seeing them. The strange pair looked at the city, at all their faces, so full of hope. They looked up at the sky, so infinitely high and crystal clear. There was no end to the possibilities. The future of man belonged only to man. Well, that was a load of old shit. I think they used our likenesses. Can we sue? Out the butt! Yes, we should sue.